Go on, get out and eat like a beggar." My son's voice rang out, as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, cutting through the clinking of expensive glasses the moment I realized there was no seat for me at his promotion party. I just stood there, frozen, caught between my daughter-in-law's mocking gaze and the complicit silence of everyone else at the table. My name is Joan Miller. I'm 72 years old from Chicago, and I spent my entire life building an empire from the ground up, only to be treated like a stain to be scrubbed away by the very son I love more than life itself. But they didn't know one thing. In this game of power they had just started, they had picked the wrong opponent. So settle in and listen to a mother's final gamble, a bet I made with everything I had left, including the little time I have left on this earth. It all started on an October evening in Chicago, one of those evenings when the chill in the air carries the scent of dry leaves and coming rain. I've lived in this city long enough to know that the glitter of the skyscrapers has always hidden some dark stories down below. And that night, my own story was about to be laid bare under the brightest lights, in a place that was supposed to feel like home. I'd spent the whole afternoon getting ready. Not the excited preparation of a mother going to her son's party, but the quiet ritual of an old soldier putting on her armor one last time. I stood in front of my closet, my hand brushing against meticulously tailored suits and silk dresses I used to wear to board meetings. But in the end, I chose a simple teal wool dress. It was a dress that said nothing of cower or money. It just said I was a mother, a 72-year-old woman. That was the role my son Kevin had chosen for me, and tonight I was going to play it to perfection, right before the final curtain was drawn. In my cozy little apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, silence is a familiar friend. On the table next to my armchair, there's a faded photograph. It's me and Michael, my late husband, standing in front of a run-down little spot with a wooden sign that read Sterling Diner. Our smiles back then were so bright, the smiles of people with nothing to their names but love and a dream. Tonight, I was going to the Sterling Perch, a name I myself chose to honor those humble beginnings. The only thing is, my son had either forgotten that or he had always looked down on it. A sharp pain flickered in my chest, a familiar reminder of the secret I was carrying. I clenched my fist, took a deep breath, and waited for it to pass. The doctor said I had about a year, 1 year, 365 days to right the wrongs of a lifetime. Not my wrongs, but the wrongs of the child I had loved more than my own life. This was one bet I could not afford to lose. I drove my old Buick downtown. The car felt small and out of place among the gleaming Mercedes and BMWs lined up for the valet at the Hancock Building. The young valet gave me a look of pity as I handed him the worn-out key. Little did he know that his monthly paycheck, like that of every employee in this building, was funded in part by my signature. I had gotten used to being invisible. That invisibility, sometimes, is its own kind of power. The glass elevator carried me up to the 95th floor, gliding past the city lights like a starship cruising through the galaxy. Chicago is beautiful at night, a cold and ruthless kind of beautiful. I could see the offices of Innovate Dynamics from here, where my son had just been made vice president. He had called me last week, his voice dripping with self-satisfaction. "Mom, I did it. Sterling Holdings acquired the company. They saw my talent. I'm having a little party this Friday night at the Sterling Perch. You can come if you want, but try to dress nicely." If you want. Those 3 words cut into me like a rusty blade. Not "you have to be there, Mom." Not "I want you there to celebrate with me." Just "if you want." As if my presence was a burden, a favor being granted. The elevator doors opened and the warm, luxurious air of the Sterling Perch washed over me. The smell of cedar, fresh lilies, and expensive food. The light clinking of glasses, the low hum of high society chatter. This was my world, a world I had built with my own 2 hands, forged from sleepless nights and silent tears. I saw Carl, my loyal manager, standing at the host station. He saw me, and a flicker of surprise and concern crossed his eyes. I gave him a slight shake of my head, a signal to let things play out. Tonight, I was just an uninvited guest. From across the room, I could see Kevin, my son. He was in the center of a group, tall and handsome in his expensive Italian suit. His hair was slicked back, his smile was brilliant, but his eyes weren't. They were always scanning the room, searching for approval, for admiration. He was a self-made man, someone who had climbed to the top all on his own. He had tried so hard to erase every trace of the old Sterling diner, to erase the mother who worked 3 jobs at a time to give him the life he had today. Beside him was Tiffany, his wife. She looked like a porcelain doll, perfect and soulless in her sparkling cocktail dress. She smiled, she nodded, but her eyes were full of calculation. She married Kevin's status, not the man. I knew that. I took a deep breath, clutched my handbag, and let the attendant hold the heavy glass door open for me. From the entrance of the Sterling Perch, I could see them. The long table was set in the best spot in the house, right next to the panoramic window overlooking Chicago's sea of lights. 8 people, 8 chairs, not a single empty space. My son Kevin sat at the head of the table, like a conductor leading his orchestra. His arms gestured grandly, his smile was radiant, his confident voice rising above the smooth jazz music. As I got closer, I could hear his self-congratulatory words. They saw the potential, he was saying to an older gentleman I recognized as a major tech investor. Mr. Sterling doesn't invest in mediocrity. This is a whole new ballgame. Mr. Sterling, my friend, my partner, who had been with me through the stormiest of days, the only person on earth who knew the hand of cards I was about to play. My arrival, an old woman in a plain wool dress, created a small ripple in the noisy atmosphere. A few pairs of eyes glanced my way, probably thinking I was a lost tourist or a low-level server bringing a special order. They quickly returned to Kevin's story, unconcerned. But one man, sitting next to Kevin, likely a close colleague, squinted at me a moment longer. Then, as if in recognition, he nudged my son's arm. "Kevin," he whispered, his voice laced with surprise. I think that's your mother." I saw the brilliant smile on Kevin's face freeze, then shatter like a thin sheet of ice. He turned, and for a split second I saw pure panic in his eyes, the panic of an actor who's suddenly forgotten his lines on the big stage. His gaze swept over me, from my silver hair down to my sensible flat shoes, a quick, judgmental scan. That look said it all. Disappointment, shame, and a simmering anger that my ill-timed, out-of-place arrival had ruined his perfect performance. "Mom," he finally said, and his voice, though he tried to keep it steady, was strained with annoyance. I didn't think you were coming." "You invited me, and so I came," I replied, keeping my own voice even. I looked around the lavishly set table. There were 8 people and exactly 8 chairs. There was no place for me. That absence wasn't an accident. It was a message, a clear and cruel statement. It felt like a knife being driven straight into my heart without a moment's hesitation. Tiffany smiled, a smile as sweet as poison-laced honey. "Hello, Mother. We're so sorry. There must have been a mix-up with the reservation. Everyone is already here." "A mix-up?" I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. I looked directly into Kevin's eyes, the same blue eyes as Michael, but now they held only coldness and distance. "So, you want me to just stand here?" A heavy silence fell over the table. His colleagues looked away, pretending to admire the city view. They were uncomfortable, but none of them dared to speak. They all worked under Kevin, and they knew where the power lay. Kevin cleared his throat, his initial embarrassment quickly turning to irritation. He felt cornered, and when a cornered animal feels threatened, it bares its teeth. "Look, Mom," he began, lowering his voice, but still loud enough for everyone to hear. "I already told you, this isn't the place for you. These are important partners. They don't need to hear about the old days." "The old days?" I asked, my voice beginning to tremble. "You mean the days I worked myself to the bone so you could go to college? The days we split a cup of noodles because that's all we had?" Kevin's face flushed a deep red. His shame morphed into rage. He couldn't stand being unmasked in front of the very people he was trying so desperately to impress. And that's when he said the words I knew would haunt me until my dying day. "I don't care," he hissed. "That past is dead. I escaped it. Don't you get it? I don't want anything to do with it anymore." He jerked his chin toward the door. "Please, don't embarrass me. You can go outside and find a diner somewhere and eat like a beggar." A beggar? The word hung in the air, sharp and cold. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The smooth jazz music faltered to a stop. I could feel dozens of eyes turning towards me. Tiffany let out a little titter of a laugh, a small but piercing sound, covering her mouth with a silk napkin as if it were all just a delightful joke. For a moment, I felt the floor give way beneath me. The pain that hit me wasn't sharp. It was a cold, hollowing emptiness. The woman who had sacrificed everything for her son had just died on that spot. Every memory of the long nights I'd stayed up with him when he was sick, the tears of pride on his graduation day, it all turned to dust. I pulled my shoulders back. The fragile smile was gone, replaced by a mask of stone. I signaled to Carl, the manager, who was standing frozen nearby. He rushed over, his face pale with worry. "Mrs. Miller," he began. I leaned in close to his ear, my voice a whisper but filled with an authority that only he could hear. "Call Mr. Sterling." Carl froze. His eyes widened, his confusion melting into understanding, and finally, into absolute respect. He gave a single, sharp nod, said nothing, and quickly turned back towards his office. Then I turned back to face my son and his whole world. I lifted my chin, looking straight into Kevin's stunned eyes. I took a deep breath, letting the tense silence stretch over the room. And then I spoke, my voice no longer trembling. It rang out, clear, steely, and filled with a power none of them had ever known. "Very well," I said. "If someone has to leave tonight, it most certainly will not be me." The silence that followed my words lasted only a second before it was shattered by a high, tinkling laugh. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, had regained her smug confidence. She leaned back in her chair, one hand toying with her wine glass, the other held theatrically to her mouth. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "Who do you think you are, Mother? The Queen of England? Or do you actually think this place is owned by our family, that you can just say whatever you want?" Kevin, as if emboldened by his wife's audacity, joined in. He leaned forward, trying to intimidate me with his glare. "Mom, that's enough," he hissed, his voice full of menace. "Don't make a fool of yourself. Tiffany's right. You're embarrassing all of us. Please, just leave before I have to call security." They were a perfect pair, an alliance built on arrogance and cruelty. They thought they had won. They thought my words were just the last feeble protest of a cornered old woman. Carl, the manager, returned. His face was no longer worried or confused. It was set in an expression of grave focus. He completely ignored Kevin and Tiffany, giving me a respectful nod. Following behind him were two waiters, and they weren't empty-handed. They were carrying a chair. Not just a spare chair from another table. This was a plush, deep blue velvet armchair. a chair I knew well, the one normally kept in Mr. Sterling's private room, reserved only for the most honored guests. They placed the chair at the head of the table, the seat of honor, with a quiet, formal precision. Kevin shot to his feet, his face crimson with a mixture of anger and humiliation. His authority was being challenged in front of his partners. "Carl, what in God's name do you think you're doing?" he shouted. "I didn't ask for another chair. Who gave you permission to bring this here?" He turned on the waiter. "Is this how this restaurant treats its guests? I'm the one paying for this party." The young waiter who had placed the chair simply turned, gave Kevin a slight bow, and replied in a clear, steady voice, "I'm merely following orders, sir." "Orders? Whose orders?" Kevin roared. But the waiter didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away, giving Kevin no chance for further questions. Carl, too, took a few quiet steps back, standing at a respectful distance with his hands clasped, his eyes fixed on me as if awaiting his next instruction. Utter confusion was written all over Kevin's and Tiffany's faces. Whose orders? Who had the authority to issue orders in this restaurant, at their table, over their heads? Their confidence began to falter. A small crack had appeared in the fortress of arrogance they had built. They looked at me, then at the magnificent armchair that stood there like a throne, and for the first time that evening, a shadow of doubt, a faint glimmer of fear, began to creep into their eyes. The air in the room was thick with the tension even heavier than before. The play wasn't over. It had just moved into a new act, one where they were no longer the main characters. And that's when the main doors to the restaurant opened once again. Mr. Sterling walked in. William Sterling was not a man you could ignore. He was in his late 60s with a mane of salt and pepper hair, impeccably dressed in a Savile Row suit. He moved with a quiet confidence, the aura of a man accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed. All conversation in the restaurant quieted as he passed. He was the king in his castle, and his presence commanded attention. Kevin's face lit up. His confusion and anger were momentarily forgotten, replaced by a fawning, delighted expression. Here he was, his savior, the CEO of Sterling Holdings, the most powerful man he knew. Mr. Sterling would put an end to this chaos. He would throw this troublesome old woman out and restore order to his party. "Mr. Sterling!" Kevin nearly jumped out of his chair, eagerly extending a hand. "What an honor! I had no idea you were coming." But Mr. Sterling didn't look at Kevin. His eyes passed over my son as if he were a piece of furniture. He ignored the outstretched hand. Instead, he walked in a straight, unwavering line directly to me, the quiet woman in the old wool dress. In front of everyone, his business partners, the staff, and his own son, William Sterling, one of the most powerful men in Chicago, bowed his head to me with the deepest respect. "Joan," he said, his voice low and warm, "my apologies for keeping you waiting." If there had been silence in the room before, now there was a vacuum. The air felt like it had been sucked out. I could hear a fork drop onto a plate at a nearby table, a sound that was jarring in the dead stillness. Kevin stood frozen, his arms still hanging awkwardly in the air. His expression shifted from elation to disbelief and then to pure horror. "Mr. Sterling, you know my mother?" he stammered, his voice choked. Mr. Sterling finally turned to look at him, but there was no recognition in his eyes, only a cold disappointment. "Know her, young man?" he said, his voice even, but each word landed like a hammer blow. "I work for her." A collective gasp rippled through the room. "Welcome to the Sterling Perch," Mr. Sterling continued, his voice ringing out clearly. Just then, he came to my side, placing a hand on the back of my chair like a loyal sentinel. He didn't look at me, but straight at the stunned faces around the table. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Sterling began, his voice deep and calm, but carrying an undeniable authority that commanded the room's attention. "I'm William Sterling. It's wonderful to see you all here to celebrate our new partnership." He paused, then turned to me, his eyes full of respect. "And perhaps this is the most fitting moment to introduce you to the person who made all of this possible. I'd like you to meet Mrs. Joan Miller, the founder, chairwoman, and the very soul of Sterling Holdings." A profound silence fell over the room. The partners looked at each other, then at me, then back at Kevin, trying to connect the impossible dots. Kevin shot to his feet, his face ashen. "Sterling, Miller, no, that can't be." Mr. Sterling continued, his tone even, leaving no room for interruption. "And, by the way, regarding the acquisition of Innovate Dynamics," he said, looking directly at Kevin, "that was an interesting decision. To be frank, on the list of potential companies in the field, Innovate Dynamics was merely average. There were better, more profitable options, but we decided to acquire it anyway." He paused, letting the tension build to a breaking point. "Because it was a direct order from Mrs. Miller." And there it was. The bomb had dropped, not with a loud bang, but with a devastating silent implosion. Kevin's pride, the very foundation of his smug satisfaction, had just been pulverized. He wasn't some sought-after talent. He was simply the lucky son of a powerful mother. "Why?" Tiffany was the first to break the silence, her voice a shrill, panicked squeak. "Why would you do that?" Kevin stared at me, his eyes no longer filled with arrogance, but with utter bewilderment. "Mom, why did you hide this from me?" Mr. Sterling offered a polite smile. "I believe those are questions best left for the family to resolve. For now," he said, turning to the other guests, "here at the Sterling Perch, the enjoyment of our guests is paramount. Please, allow me to escort you to a private dining room where the celebration can continue. Regardless of who you are, we'll ensure you have a wonderful evening." It was a masterful move, both professional and a polite way of ushering the outsiders away from the family tragedy. The guests, looking more than a little relieved, quickly stood and followed Mr. Sterling, leaving the three of us alone in the vast, silent space. The moment the private room door clicked shut, Kevin and Tiffany's civilized facade shattered. "What the hell have you done?" Kevin roared, storming toward me, his fists clenched at his sides. "You humiliated me. You made me look like a complete fool in front of everyone." "I didn't do anything, Kevin," I replied, my voice cruelly calm. "You did that to yourself. I simply pulled back the curtain so everyone could see the truth you've been trying so hard to hide." "The truth?" Tiffany interjected, her voice sharp as a razor. "The truth is that you've been deceiving us for years. You pretended to be some poor old woman while you were sitting on an entire empire. Did you enjoy that, Mrs. Miller? Did it make you feel powerful?" I turned to my daughter-in-law. "I never deceived anyone. I live in the same apartment I've lived in for 30 years. I drive the car my husband left me. I don't hide my wealth. I simply don't flaunt it. That's a distinction people like you will never understand." "You're cruel!" Tiffany shrieked, her voice high and piercing. "You had all of this, so why didn't you tell us sooner? Why not give us a better start in life? You just wanted to watch us struggle and laugh at us, didn't you? You're a selfish woman who only thinks about herself." "Selfish?" I repeated, the word tasting like bile. "Yes, selfish," Kevin picked up the thread, his rage blinding him to all reason. "You've always been this way. Remember? 3 years ago, I came to you. I begged you. I needed money to invest in that project, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And what did you say? You said you didn't have it. You said you only had enough for your retirement. You lied. If I'd had that money then, maybe I wouldn't need your charity now." He was talking about the green tech project he'd gotten swept up in. A painful memory washed over me. I remembered that afternoon perfectly. He had come home, his eyes burning with ambition, showing me a binder full of fanciful charts and empty promises. I didn't lend him the money, that was true, not because I didn't have it, but because I had used my connections to do a little digging. I knew it was a ghost project, a scam set up to fleece naive investors. A few months later, the whole thing collapsed and the founder disappeared with millions. I had saved him from bankruptcy, from humiliation, but I never told him. I thought it was better to let him think I was poor than to wound his pride. A mistake, a fatal mistake. My son, he didn't care about the truth. He only saw the phantom profits he'd missed out on, magnified by the greed of the woman standing beside him. I listened to their accusations, their curses. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice, but my face remained a mask of stone. I was just so tired. "Are you finished?" I finally asked, my voice cold and distant. They stopped, surprised by my composure. "If you can't speak to me with a shred of decency," I continued, "then there's nothing more to say." I slowly got to my feet, feeling that familiar sharp pain in my chest. This fortune is mine. I built it with my own 2 hands. Who I give it to and how I choose to use it is not up for discussion with either of you. I looked Kevin straight in the eye. "You shouldn't be worried about the past. You should be worried about the meeting tomorrow morning. I'll see you at 9 o'clock at the Sterling Holdings main office." I paused, a wave of infinite sadness washing over me. I had been going to tell him. Tonight, I was going to tell him about my condition, about the little time I had left. I had hoped that, in his moment of joy, we might find some connection. But maybe it didn't matter anymore. I turned and walked away without a backward glance. I left behind my son's screaming questions and my daughter-in-law's shrill accusations. The sounds echoed behind me, but to my ears, they were just meaningless noise, bouncing back from a world I no longer belonged to. As I passed the host station, Carl bowed his head. "Good night, Mrs. Miller." "Thank you, Carl," I said. It was a memorable evening. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the waves of Lake Michigan soothe the shore in the darkness. The memories came, an unstoppable tide. I remembered Kevin as a little boy, with bright eyes and a smile that could light up a room. He used to be my whole world. I remembered the promise I made to Michael on his deathbed, that I would take care of our boy, that I would give him a better life. Had I kept that promise? Or had I been so busy building a fortress of money to protect him that the very same walls ended up sealing him away from me? The next morning, I arrived at the office at 8:30. My office is on the top floor, a large space with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the entire city. It's simply furnished, no lavish decorations, just a large wooden desk, a few chairs, and a lot of books. This is where I make million-dollar decisions, but it's still just a room. Real power doesn't come from a room. It comes from within. At exactly 9 o'clock, my secretary informed me that Kevin and Tiffany had arrived. I told her to send them in. They walked in looking like completely different people from the night before. The arrogance and glamour were gone. Kevin wore a suit, but it looked awkward on him, his tie loosened. Tiffany wore a simple business dress, her unmade-up face showing clear signs of exhaustion and anxiety. They looked like two children who'd been called to the principal's office. Mr. Sterling was already seated. His presence gave the meeting a formal, serious air. "Sit down," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. They sat in the chairs opposite my desk, keeping a safe distance. I folded my hands on the desk. We're not going to waste time with more accusations. What happened last night happened. It can't be changed. Now we're going to talk about the future, your future. Kevin looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He probably thought this was going to be a conversation about dividing up the assets, about what portion of my empire he would be granted. I extinguished that flicker of hope immediately. "Kevin," I began, "you're not fired." He let out a small sigh of relief. Tiffany did too. "You're going to start over," I continued. And then I delivered my sentence, one that couldn't be found in any law book. "Starting tomorrow, you will be working in the Innovate Dynamics warehouse. Your position, intern. Your salary, state minimum wage." The relief on Kevin's face vanished, replaced by utter disbelief. "The warehouse? An intern? You have to be kidding me." "I never kid when it comes to business," I replied. "You are going to learn everything from the ground up. You will learn how to lift boxes, how to pack shipments, how to enter data. You will learn that a company isn't just built by vice presidents in air-conditioned offices, but by the sweat of hundreds of people you've never bothered to notice." Kevin's disbelief turned to fury. He slammed his hand on the desk. "I won't do it. This isn't a lesson. This is humiliation. You're trying to destroy me. This is revenge." I looked him right in the eye, the pain in my chest flaring again, but my voice remained unshaken. "Destruction is building your castle on sand, Kevin. I am giving you a foundation of stone." I took a deep breath, then delivered the ultimatum. "You have two choices." I paused, letting the silence press down on them with the weight of the coming decision. "You can take the offer, or you can leave with nothing." "Nothing?" Tiffany cried out, her voice thin with panic. "You can't do that. Kevin is your only son." "It is precisely because he is my only son," I said, my voice lowering, carrying the weight of my 72 years, "that I cannot allow him to continue living as an ungrateful, delusional man. Leaving with nothing means not a single penny from my estate. No house, no car, no stocks. Everything you two currently possess, the house in Winnetka, the Porsche, was purchased with funds from a trust I established for Kevin. And I have every right to freeze that trust effective immediately." I turned to Mr. Sterling. "William, are the papers ready?" Mr. Sterling nodded and pushed a thick file across the desk toward me. "Just needs your signature, Joan." That cold, hard fact broke them. They had nothing. It was all an illusion, created with my money. I looked at Kevin. His face was white. He was standing at a crossroads. One path led to humiliation, manual labor, and the death of his enormous ego. The other path led to emptiness, to the loss of every material thing he had used to define himself. I knew which path he would choose. He was a coward, but he wasn't a fool. His head dropped, his shoulders shaking. "I'll do it," he mumbled, his voice choked with defeat. I nodded. "Good. Report to the warehouse manager at 7 a.m. tomorrow." I then turned to Tiffany. "As for you, you will not be working in the warehouse, but you will have a new job. You will be a full-time volunteer at the North Shore Senior Center, which my charitable foundation funds. You will learn to care for the elderly who have been abandoned by their children. You will learn that a person's worth is not measured by the designer handbag they carry." Tiffany started to protest, but one look from me and the words died in her throat. "Your house and car will be repossessed. I continued, my voice as even as a judge's verdict. You will move into a rented apartment in the Lincoln Park area. Your monthly budget will be $5,000, and that includes rent. Mr. Sterling will oversee your finances. Every single dollar you spend will be accounted for. If the verdict about their jobs had stunned them, this attack on their material status symbols made Kevin explode. No, he roared, jumping to his feet, slamming both hands on my desk with a loud thud. Absolutely not. That house is in my name. That car is mine. You have no right to touch them. I worked hard for those things. That's right. Tiffany stood up with him, her voice frantic and shrill. You can't do that. That's our property. I looked at them, completely unfazed. I leaned back slightly in my chair, an almost casual gesture. Oh, I'm not forcing you, I said. You don't have to go. Kevin let out a breath of relief, a smirk almost forming on his lips. He thought he'd found a boundary, a weak point in my plan. He thought he could at least hold on to his public image. Fine, he said, trying to regain his composure. Then we'll stay. It was then that Mr. Sterling, who had been silent the entire time, cleared his throat. The small sound drew all their attention. Let me clarify something for you, Kevin, he said, his tone perfectly calm and professional, as if reading a contract clause. Not going simply means that you will not be voluntarily surrendering the assets. In that case, we will initiate legal proceedings to repossess them within the next 48 hours. He paused, looking directly into Kevin and Tiffany's stunned faces. And, of course, he continued, delivering the final, fatal blow. After that, you will have to find a place to live using your own money. Because the entire trust fund in your name, the source of the funds used to purchase those assets, will be frozen indefinitely, effective this very second. The second shock was even more profound than the first. It was as if the ground had just split open beneath their feet. They owned nothing. They were just people using the expensive toys I had bought for them. They staggered, their faces drained of all color. Tiffany collapsed back into her chair, her hands covering her face. Kevin stared at me, the anger gone, replaced by raw desperation and confusion. Why? He whispered, his voice broken. Why now? Why are you doing this? What did we do wrong? The question, it was so painfully naive. They truly didn't know. In their selfish world, they couldn't see their own cruelty. I looked directly into my son's eyes. For the first time in that meeting, I let a sliver of real emotion show. Not anger, but a deep, bottomless sadness, an infinite disappointment. That, I said slowly, letting each word sink in, is a very good question, Kevin. I stood up, the posture of a person who has made their final decision. I walked around the desk, toward the door. I think you'll find the answer to that question soon enough. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. Now, please leave. I didn't have to say it twice. They stumbled to their feet and left my office like two hollow ghosts, the door closing behind them, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The moment they were gone, the strength I had been holding onto for so long finally evaporated. I felt utterly drained. I collapsed into the nearest chair, buried my face in my hands, and for the first time all day, I allowed myself to be weak. Hot tears streamed through my fingers, tears not of betrayal, but for the painful beginning of a lesson I should have taught my son a long, long time ago. Mr. Sterling came to my side. You did the right thing, Joan. Did I, William? I whispered through my hands. Or did I just destroy my only son? You gave him a chance, he said. A chance to become the man his father would have been proud of. The rest is up to him. I knew he was right, but a mother's heart can't stop bleeding, and all I could do was pray that, at the end of this painful road, I wouldn't lose my son forever. The first few days after the verdict were the longest of my life. My apartment was filled with a heavy silence, a silence different from its usual peace. This one was filled with anxiety, with waiting. Every time the phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat. I was terrified. I both longed for a call from Kevin and dreaded it. I had no idea what I would say if he called, to beg, to curse me, or to say goodbye for good. But no call ever came. Mr. Sterling kept me updated. He did so with discretion and respect. "They sold the house and the car, Joan," he reported after the first week. "The selling price was lower than expected. It seems they were in a hurry. They've moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. I've arranged for the rent to be deducted directly." The house in Winnetka they were so proud of, with its manicured lawn and spacious rooms, now belonged to someone else. The Porsche that Kevin cherished more than anything had a new owner. They had been stripped of their make-believe kingdom and thrown into a reality they were completely unprepared for. "And their jobs?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Tiffany started at the nursing home," he said. "The director there says she's very reluctant. She spends most of her time looking at her phone, but she shows up on time." Reluctant? I wasn't surprised. For Tiffany, being forced to confront old age, sickness, and loneliness was a punishment worse than any physical labor. "And Kevin?" I asked, the question I feared the most. Mr. Sterling was quiet for a moment. "He went to the warehouse, Joan. He reported for duty at 7 a.m. sharp." He paused. "The warehouse manager says he's a disaster. He has no idea what he's doing. He's clumsy, awkward, and has a real attitude. He broke a whole pallet of goods on his first day." I closed my eyes. A familiar sense of failure washed over me. "Did he get into any fights?" "No," he replied. "Just a defiant silence. He does the work, but like a machine. No emotion, no communication. The other workers try to stay clear of him." I knew that silence. It was Kevin's weapon when he felt hurt and powerless. It was the wall he built so that no one could see how weak he felt inside. The next few weeks passed in a blur of anxiety and brief reports. I started a new course of treatment, an experimental one, hoping it might buy me a little more time. The pains were becoming more frequent. I was tired, physically and mentally. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if my gamble had been too cruel. Was I pushing my son further away instead of pulling him closer? One evening, out of the blue, Tiffany called me. It was late, about 3 weeks after my shock treatment had begun. I was sitting and reading when the phone rang, Tiffany's name flashing on the screen. "Mrs. Miller!" Her voice shot out the second I answered, with no greeting, only a mix of shrillness and resentment. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Are you happy now, seeing our lives completely destroyed like this?" I remained silent, letting her vent. "I'm going crazy," she screamed, and I could hear a sob in her voice, but it was a sob of rage, not sorrow. "That nursing home, it smells of antiseptic and despair. And Kevin, he comes home every night like a ghost, all grimy and his face is just dark. He doesn't say a single word. You call this a lesson? This is torture. No mother would treat her own son this way. You are a selfish, heartless woman." She went on and on, every word an accusation, a knife aimed right at me. But I've grown so accustomed to pain, both physical and emotional. Her words couldn't hurt me anymore. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I spoke, my voice cool and distant, completely devoid of emotion. "You don't have to continue," I said simply. "The volunteering, living in that apartment, it's all part of the conditions. If you find it unbearable, you are perfectly free to leave." "Leave?" she shrieked, as if she couldn't believe her ears. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said clearly, "you can leave Kevin. You can go back to the life you want. The choice is yours." There was a sudden, dead silence on the other end of the line. I hadn't given her the sympathy she was looking for. I hadn't argued. I had simply offered her an escape route, one that would expose her true colors. If she left, she would prove she was nothing more than a gold digger. The silence stretched on, and I knew a fierce battle was raging in her mind. Finally, without another word, she hung up. A few days later, Mr. Sterling sent me a report. It wasn't just about finances. It also included notes from the manager of the apartment building where they were living. He reported that loud arguments had been coming from their apartment at night. Kevin would come home after a 10-hour day in the warehouse, his body aching, his mind exhausted. He'd walk into the small, stuffy apartment, a world away from their sprawling home in Winnetka. The smell of cheap fast food hung in the air. Tiffany would be on the worn-out sofa, scrolling furiously on her phone. She had just gotten back from the nursing home, her mood no better than his. She'd look up, see her husband's disheveled state, and disgust would wash over her face. "Can't you at least shower before you sit down, Kevin?" she'd snap. "You reek of a warehouse." That was the last straw. "Well, what do you want me to do?" Kevin roared, the exhaustion and pent-up frustration of the past weeks finally exploding. "You want me to douse myself in cologne after hauling hundreds of boxes? I'm living in hell, Tiffany, and all you can do is sit there and complain?" "Hell?" she laughed, a bitter, shrill sound. "What about me? You think I'm having a grand time cleaning up after senile old people? Listening to them tell the same meaningless stories over and over? I gave up everything for you. My friends, my life. For me?" Kevin stepped toward her, his eyes red with fury. "Or for my mother's money? Let's stop pretending, Tiffany. We both know why you were with me. And now that it's gone, you just can't stand it, can you?" "And what about you?" she shot back, standing up to face him. "Are you some kind of saint? The man who threw his own mother out of a restaurant like a dog? Who humiliated her in front of everyone? And now you're playing the victim? This is all your fault, your stupidity and your arrogance." They screamed at each other, hurling accusations and bitter truths they had managed to ignore for years. Their fight wasn't just about their current situation. It was about everything. About money, about status, about fake affection, about broken dreams, and about a marriage built on a hollow foundation. With the money and luxury gone, that hollowness was laid bare, raw and terrifying. They weren't just facing the consequences of their actions, they were facing the truth about their own relationship. And that truth was more painful than losing a mansion and a sports car. I finished reading the report and quietly folded it. I felt no satisfaction. I only felt a profound sadness. The collapse was necessary, but watching it happen is always painful. They were at rock bottom, and from the bottom, there are only two ways to go: keep sinking or start climbing. That choice was entirely up to them. Time kept moving. Autumn passed and winter arrived. Chicago was buried in white snow and icy winds. I received more regular reports from Mr. Sterling. Gradually, small changes began to happen. The warehouse manager reported that Kevin no longer had an attitude. He was still quiet, but he had started to learn. He asked the other workers how to operate the forklift, how to stack inventory efficiently. He stopped breaking things. He was the first to arrive and the last to leave. "The kid works like he's trying to punish himself," the manager said. "He's not like a former VP. He's like a man trying to pay off a debt." At the nursing home, Tiffany was also beginning to change. At first, she only did what was assigned. But then, the director told me that she had started sitting and talking with the residents. She read books to a blind woman. She helped an old man write letters to his grandchildren. "She still keeps her distance," the director said, "but she's listening, and that's the most important thing." I didn't visit them. I knew my presence would only add more pressure. I needed them to find their own way. My gamble was a bet on self-awareness, and I couldn't interfere with the process. And then, the moment I had both hoped for and feared finally came. It was a February afternoon with heavy snow falling. Mr. Sterling called me, a note of excitement in his voice. "Joan, there's something you need to know." He told me the warehouse had just undergone a surprise safety inspection. Everything was fine, but there was a hidden problem no one had noticed. An old fire suppression system in a little-used section of the building was faulty. If a fire broke out, it wouldn't work. It was a massive risk, one that could cause millions in damages and even endanger lives. And Kevin was the one who found it, Mr. Sterling said. I held my breath. What did he do? That's the remarkable part, Joan, he continued. He didn't run to the manager to take credit. He pulled up the old building schematics on his own time and figured out the flaw in the pipe layout. Then he wrote up a detailed report, not just identifying the problem, but proposing 3 different solutions to fix it, complete with cost and time estimates for each. It was as professional as any report from a chief engineer. He submitted the report to his manager, Mr. Sterling went on. He just said, I think we should look at this. He didn't ask for any recognition. He simply did what needed to be done. When I heard those words, a warmth I hadn't felt in a very long time began to spread through my chest. It wasn't the pride of a businesswoman whose employee had solved a problem. It was the hope of a mother. For the first time in months, I saw a glimmer of light. Kevin was no longer acting like a demoted vice president. He was acting like a responsible man. The change didn't come from words, but from quiet action. He wasn't trying to prove himself to the world anymore. He was starting to prove himself to himself. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, looking out the window as the snowflakes continued to fall. I remembered Kevin's words from that night, like a beggar. The pain was still there, a scar that would never fully heal. But next to that scar, a tiny seed had begun to sprout, a seed of hope. I knew the journey was still far from over. One right action couldn't erase a whole past of wrong ones. But it was a start. It was the first light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. I picked up the phone and called my doctor. Dr. Lee, I said, I want to know more about the next course of treatment. I need more time. I think I need to have more time. I needed to live to see how this seed would grow. After the incident at the warehouse, a subtle shift occurred. Kevin wasn't promoted. He was still a low-level employee, still doing the same grunt work. But the way he did it was different. The defiant silence was gone, replaced by a quiet focus. The other workers stopped avoiding him. They started saying hello, sometimes asking his opinion on a problem. They didn't call him old boss, they just called him Kevin. And I knew that for my son, at that moment, being called by his own name, just like a regular guy, was the greatest recognition of all. Spring arrived, melting the ice in Chicago, and it seemed to melt some of the ice in their relationship too. Tiffany continued her work at the nursing home. The director there called me again. Mrs. Miller, she said, her voice full of surprise. I thought you should know. Tiffany organized a book club for the residents on her own initiative. She even fundraised a little money to buy large print books. She's changed, she really has. I listened, and a rare smile touched my lips. Perhaps when you strip away all the glittering distractions, people finally have a chance to discover the hidden beauty within themselves. My time, however, was not waiting for their changes to come to full bloom. The treatments could only slow the inevitable. The pains came more often, and I grew weaker with each passing day. I knew I didn't have much time left. One late afternoon, as the pale golden light of late spring streamed through my window, Mr. Sterling arrived with his weekly report. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, a thin wool blanket over my legs, trying to read a book, but the words kept blurring before my eyes. Hello, Joan, he said, his familiar deep voice unable to hide a flicker of concern as he looked at me. I smiled, a smile that probably looked more tired than anything else. Hello, William. Please, sit. What's the news? He sat in the chair opposite me, placing his briefcase on the table but not opening it right away. His gaze lingered on my face, and I knew he saw the change. My skin was paler, and there were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. The reports are very good, he said, Tiffany's fundraising for the library was a success, and Kevin, he's been voluntarily staying after his shift to train some of the new hires. The warehouse manager says he's become someone they can truly rely on. I nodded, a sense of warmth and pride cutting through the fatigue. Good, that's very good. Mr. Sterling was quiet for a moment, his usual professionalism seeming to melt away, leaving only the concern of a dear old friend. "Joan," he said gently, "are you all right? You seem much weaker." I let out a long breath, one I felt like I'd been holding in all day. "Time is no longer my friend, William." He looked at me, his eyes full of anguish. "Then, are you going to tell them about your condition?" I turned my head to look out the window, where clouds drifted lazily across a pale blue sky. I had asked myself that question 100 times during my sleepless nights. Telling them might bring me their sympathy, their care. It might speed up their process of repentance. But it would be a repentance built on pity, on guilt. It wouldn't be a true change from within. My entire gamble would become meaningless. "No, William," I whispered, my voice nearly carried away by the wind outside. "But why not, Joan?" he asked, a hint of urgency in his voice. "They have a right to know, and you deserve to have them take care of you." I turned back to him, and this time I smiled, a real smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "That doesn't matter anymore, William," I said. "Their taking care of me now is not nearly as important as them learning to take care of their own souls." I took a breath, trying to sit up a little straighter. "They are getting better. My son is learning how to be a real man, one who finds value in his work, not in his title. My daughter-in-law is learning to care for others, not just herself. That is what matters to me. That is the only legacy I want to leave behind, a legacy that can't be measured in dollars." Mr. Sterling looked at me, and in his eyes I saw a deep, profound understanding. He didn't say another word, just gave a quiet nod. He knew this was my final decision, one made not with the mind of a businesswoman, but with the heart of a mother nearing the end of her journey. One afternoon, without my knowledge, Mr. Sterling went to see Kevin. He invited Kevin to sit down, not as an employee, but as an equal. He told Kevin what he had accomplished over the past year, not with empty praise, but with numbers, with hard data. He talked about the fire suppression system report and about how Kevin had suggested a change in the packing process that was now saving the company tens of thousands of dollars each quarter. Kevin just sat there, listening in silence. His face showed no emotion. And then Mr. Sterling said the words I had instructed him to say. "You've done very well, Kevin. Your mother would be very proud." It was the first time in nearly a year that the word mother had been spoken in his work environment. When he heard that, Kevin looked up and his eyes were a storm of emotions he had suppressed for so long. "There's something else you should probably know," Mr. Sterling continued, his voice becoming formal yet full of compassion. He took a file from his desk drawer, a medical file with my name on the top. "Your mother asked me to keep this confidential, but I believe it's time you knew." He pushed the file across the desk toward Kevin. "She was diagnosed with terminal cancer right before she acquired your company," Mr. Sterling said, his voice gentle but clear. "The doctor said she only has a few months left. All of this, everything she's done, it wasn't a punishment, Kevin. It was her final gamble to make sure her son could stand on his own 2 feet when she was gone." In that moment, Kevin's world seemed to stop spinning. He sat frozen, his eyes glued to the file. His trembling hand reached out, touching the edge of the paper as if it were red hot. Then he opened it. He scanned the complex medical terms, the prognosis charts, the cold clinical words like metastasis and inoperable. Silence filled the room. Mr. Sterling just sat there, giving him the space to confront this terrible truth. And then he broke.
His shoulders started to shake violently. He buried his face in his hands, and for the first time in I don't know how many years, my son wept. He wasn't crying for his lost status. He wasn't crying for the lost money. He was crying for the mother he was about to lose. In his mind, his own words from that night must have been screaming back at him, like a beggar. I hope he remembered other moments from the past too. An unforgivable cruelty spoken to the woman who was secretly dying for him. That anguish, that regret, it was a punishment more severe than any I could have devised. My son sat like that for a long time. Then suddenly he shot up from his chair, said nothing, and bolted from the office.
I was sitting by the window in my apartment, watching the seagulls circle over the lake. I was wearing a soft silk dress, my silver hair neatly brushed. My favorite book was open on my lap. I was enjoying a few peaceful moments in my final days. The door burst open. Kevin stood there, panting, his face stained with tears, his business suit disheveled. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw an entire ocean of pain, of regret, and of love. He didn't run to me. He just slowly, deliberately knelt right there on the threshold, as if his legs could no longer carry him. He knelt there, a few feet away from me, and bowed his head to the floor. "Mom," he choked out, his voice completely broken. "Mom, I'm so sorry." All the walls he had built, all the arrogance, all the resentment, it all came crashing down. All that was left was a heartbroken son in front of his mother. I slowly stood up. Every step sent a jolt of pain through me, but I didn't let it show. I walked over to him, and I knelt down too, facing him. I raised my thin hand, my fingers calloused from years of work, and I stroked his hair, just as I had done 1,000 times when he was a little boy. He looked up at me, his blue eyes now as clear as the lake after a storm. "It's okay, Kevin," I whispered, my own voice trembling. "It's okay, son. I knew you could do it." I didn't say I forgave him. I didn't have to. In that moment, forgiveness was simply there, a silent understanding between us. "You're home now," I added. He threw his arms around me, holding on as if he was afraid I would disappear into thin air. And I held him back, using what little strength I had left. In that embrace, I felt him tremble, felt his hot tears soaking the shoulder of my dress. And I knew, right then, that my gamble had paid off. You see, at the end of the day, no matter what anyone says, a mother always thinks of her child. I was terrified that if I was gone, my boy would be lost forever. So I bet everything I had, not my money, but what was left of my time. It's ironic, isn't it? It wasn't until he was about to lose me that my son finally understood what I had done. His words of thanks and apology, they came late, but I heard them. And for me, that meant I had won my final gamble. My will, of course, had been changed. A portion of my estate was left to them, not as a reward, but as a tool for them to continue building a meaningful life. The majority of it went to establish the Joan Miller Foundation, dedicated to helping the lonely elderly and funding research into the very disease that took my life. My son, Kevin, he never went back to being a vice president. He chose to stay on, working to grow my charitable foundation. He said it was the only way he could ever hope to repay a debt that could never truly be repaid. Sometimes, I think that loss is the greatest teacher of all. It takes from us the people we love, but it gives us something more precious in return, an understanding of what life is truly about. My story ends here. It's a sad story, but I hope not a hopeless one. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is always a chance to find the light, to say you're sorry, and to come home.